Today's sponsor is Loot Crate. For less than $20 a month, Loot Crate gives the geek in you a special treat every month. You get a box of 6 to 8 items of gamer and pop culture licensed gear, apparel, collectibles, unique one-of-a-kind items, and more. This month, we're cowering in fear at the return of the Villains theme. Thanks for joining us as we celebrate our darker side with epic items from Marvel, an exclusive DC figure, a unique wearable we've never put in a crate before, it's a big crate, and more. It's good to be bad. You have until the 19th at 9 p.m. Pacific to subscribe and receive that month's crate, and when the cutoff happens, that's it. It's over. So go to lootcrate.com/KFGames and enter code KFGames to save $3 on your new subscription today. What's up, guys? Welcome to the first ever episode 30 of the Kind of Funny Gamescast. As always, I'm Tim Gettys, joined by the coolest dudes in video games, Colin Moriarty and Greg Miller. Greg, what was that face for?
Which one?
I don't know. You just gave me a face.
I was just shaking my. I was getting into the moment where I was like, and I was
I
into
gotta
it.
put my phone down.
I was done, and then you had me send your thing to you. That's what I sent. I did that.
I trapped you.
Oh, you got trapped, Greg.
Oh, Double Jeopardy, starring Jennifer
my
Lopez.
God. So we've been doing a lot of stuff. Yesterday, we recorded a Game Over Greggy show with Gary Whitta.
Yeah,
it was good.
awesome.
Brought a lot of British snacks. Couldn't stop thinking about him all night. It was a good
Gary
thing.
Whitta?
Yeah.
I couldn't stop thinking about Gary Whitta.
Me
either.
neither. I watched Columbo because of him.
I feel like everyone did except for me, the
You're
one
such a-
person that
you're
needed
such a
to.
jerk.
I'm a useless piece of garbage, Greg.
No, that's Kevin.
Oh, sorry, I'm taking your job, Kevin.
Fuck you, Kevin.
Now what are you gonna do, Kevin?
So I feel like we have a lot of Patreon people to thank at some point. We're not doing that in this episode. With
Yeah,
the
we already
thing.
did this once. Thank
Yes.
you. So we're up to date on that.
But I want to give a huge shout out to my boy Mike Bithell.
What up, Mike Bithell?
Coming through
My
with this game
dude.
Volume.
There it is.
Right here.
There it is.
From the creator of Thomas Was Alone, Mike Bithell.
Yeah.
Here is Volume.
Yeah.
His game's coming out.
Right.
And he gave us the month of shout outs thing on Patreon.
Thank
'cause
you
he's
so
such
much.
a good dude.
Patreon.com/kindoffunnygames.
So he's supporting us making this show happen. So we want to help support him make his game a success.
Right.
So Volume is a stealth game coming August 16th to PlayStation 4, PS Vita, PC, and Mac. That's crazy. From the creator of Thomas Was Alone, Volume combines a core story starring Andy Serkis and Danny Wallace with an editor that lets you make and play content as part of a community of stealth game fans. For more information, follow @VolumeGame on Twitter. So you should definitely do that. Go follow him on Twitter. Ask all the questions you want. Tell him the Kind of Funny sent you.
Right.
Specifically, Tim Gettys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim sent you.
And it's one of the funny things. And I mean, you can't, I know that Mike Bithell can't predict these kind of things, Colin. But he gave us the money. He's like, I want to do the sponsorship. I want to do this. I love you guys' content. But we took the money and then we played the game. And it's like, ah, man, you fucked up because the game's good. Like, we would have talked about the game for free, but now we got your money.
But I like here that I'm not sure, but I think in that sentence you were about to say, I love you, Greg, is what I think you were about to say, and then you said guys instead there. I love you guys.
I don't think I wasn't close to that. I usually, when I'm about to make the mistake, I don't realize I'm about to make the mistake until I already made the mistake, as you always call out when I screw something
Now
up.
I will say something about this poster. I love this poster. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about the poster is I wish it said, because it says from the creator of Thomas Was Alone.
Yeah.
I like the way Tim said it, where he's like the creator of Thomas Was Alone, Mike Bithell. So
Yeah.
what the future poster should say, in fact, is from the creator of Thomas Was Alone, comma, Mike Bithell. And then it has the volume.
You want to know why he left it off? I bet he's trying to piggyback on the Kojima Konami thing. He's gonna put out a story saying the publisher of this game himself erased his name from the posters.
God, he's such a jerk.
He knows how to play this game, all right. Yeah.
No, he knows what he's doing. I do want to give a shout out to him, too, that he...
he only paid for the one shout out. Don't be giving him all.
so many shout outs. Well, no, he paid for the shout out. He asked for the shout out months ago.
Yeah.
Like when we
He
first
planned.
launched.
Yeah.
So it's like he believed in us back when we were dumb little kids.
He
and now
did
we're just
that.
little slightly less dumb kids.
I did that. He's been timely with everything. He's kept us in the loop about everything. He shared information with us. He wrote a blog post being like, "Hey, this, some I'm sure would think was an ethical conundrum. These guys talk about games and critique them, but I'm going to do it, and here's why." And he explained the fact that we're competitively priced with ads on video game websites, and that we reach an audience that is awesome and would actually go to it, which he already knew, of course, from GDC because he came through GDC and they all followed him, and he was like, "How do I get all these followers?"
Kind of funny.
Kind of funny.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Kind of Funny Gamescast. If you guys don't know what this is, every week we get together, we talk about video games, we make videos of it, then it goes live on youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. If you want the whole thing early, you can go to patreon.com/kindoffunnygames. There's a whole smorgasbord of options. You can get the audio, you can get the video, you get all this stuff, and the coolest part is if you give just $1 a month on patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, you get an exclusive episode of this show.
Yeah.
Somehow, those exclusive episodes are even more of a train wreck than these in a good way.
It's because we let our guard down.
Yeah.
It's like, I always like to think of this podcast right here, the Gamescast, the Game Over Greggy show. When we sit around this table,
Yeah.
it's like when you show up to Thanksgiving dinner and you're in your shirt, your tie, whatever, you're looking good, you want to say hi to the family, act like you got your life together. The exclusive episodes are when your belt's undone, the shirt's unbuttoned, you're sprawled out on the couch with your closest family and friends.
So it's like when after
You have nothing to
after
prove
the
to these
Thanksgiving, when you head to the 7-Eleven to get Slurpees, even though you didn't need
Is that what you did?
I mean, I just every night probably ended there.
Okay.
I had an interesting life, and I also
But
lived
like,
2 blocks from the
battle back
7-Eleven.
for Thanksgiving, you didn't have like a Thanksgiving thing?
Oh, we did. Me and Kevin would end up at 7-Eleven getting Slurpees at some point.
See, it would always be that Poe did Thanksgiving at his family's, whatever they were, and then he'd come back to my house and play video games and eat pumpkin pie.
And that's all good.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. Now, this is a whole thing. Don't need to go down this rabbit hole,
If
but
you're about to insult pumpkin pie, we're gonna have problems.
I love pumpkin pie.
Thank you.
I always bring up the fact that I never really have a Thanksgiving because my best friend Current's birthday is that weekend every year, and we always do a massive weekend-long gaming sleepover.
Sure.
So to me,
I remember
Thanksgiving
last year I
is
distinctly asked to be invited to that. You didn't.
and you
Thank
got uninvited.
Yes,
Actually, it
thank you.
wasn't even that you weren't invited.
Thank
You were like, "Get this guy! Oh, he's not allowed anywhere."
Kieran
near
heard
this
it on the
thing."
podcast.
Yeah,
He's
he's
like, "I don't want this
"Fuck
guy
this
coming over."
shit." But no. So what I was about to say is we just recorded last month's exclusive episode of the Gamescast just went live.
The most recent Gamescast exclusive is now
Yes.
up on patreon.com/kindoffunnygames.
And it was awesome. And I really enjoyed it. And it was me, Nick, and Greg driving back from VidCon. And so it's us in the car, and we were talking about road trip gaming memories, and which included like Game Boy stuff. It also included arcade stuff, and then a lot of sidetrack stories about ridiculous things. But overall, I liked it and I enjoyed it. So you should definitely check that out.
In that video, you almost convinced me, without you knowing, because I didn't bring it up because we switched topics too quickly, to play another Pokemon. To
What?
actually beat a Pokemon.
Oh my God.
I've never done it.
Let's make this a thing at some point.
You got to pick a good
somehow.
one for me that I can get on
gold.
my nice 3DS.
Definitely, it'll be Heart Gold or Soul Silver.
Okay.
Undeniably.
Okay.
And it's going to be good. It's going to be fun. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we are talking about franchises that drastically changed for the worst.
Bomberman. No, I never forget that Bomberman reboot.
So the reason this comes up is Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest 11 was announced to be coming out on all these new systems, and there was word of it being on the NX.
So
X gonna give it to you.
X gonna give it
X
to you.
gonna give it to you, Mario, Zelda. X gonna give it to you, Star Fox, other Nintendo. Oh, X gonna give I don't know. The Nintendo
Metroid.
franchise,
Yeah.
I knew. Oh, they ain't gonna give you that.
They ain't gonna give you Metroid.
X ain't gonna give you Metroid.
Yo, X, you gonna give us Metroid? No.
Where my dog's at. Yeah. So they're doing that stuff now. Colin, big fan of Dragon Quest.
Yeah,
big fan
huge-
of all
huge
this
Dragon
stuff.
Quest fan.
You were really upset with Dragon Quest 10.
Yes.
So you suggested we have this as a topic. I'm gonna let you kind of mouth off on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this up because I think that going back to early in gaming's history, I would really say it started, most prominently in the NES era, where series are established, but then they change inexplicably, and sometimes no one had asked them to inexplicably change. And so so like
I like how you say this as the franchises or this dude that people walk
Yeah,
up
yeah,
to.
yeah.
Hey, dude, just don't change.
don't
bro."
change, Zelda.
No one asked you for this.
Mario, no one asked you to change. But the thing is that it back in the day, I felt like it worked out well for the most part, right? And I've talked about this many times, so forgive me if I'm repeating it for some people, but Mario changed, at least in the West, with the second iteration. Zelda changed drastically with the second iteration. Castlevania changed drastically with the second iteration.
Mega Man. Oh no.
No, Mega Man didn't change. Mega Man got better, I think, as well. It changed in its own ways, but it was pretty much the same gameplay wise. And what we learned from that was that these games, no one wanted these changes, but they were happening anyway, and they were good. Zelda 2 is a fucking awesome and severely underrated game. Mario 2, Mario USA is a great game. It's not as good as Mario 3, but it's a fantastic
Very
game.
great. I would say 9 out of 10.
Oh yeah, it's a great game. We just did a Let's Play for it. That might be live by the time you're listening to this, actually. Excuse me. And then Castlevania changed, and I think Simon's Quest is a super underrated game too. But then there are games that changed in that era that didn't work out. Metal Gear is a good example. ActRaiser 2 and Metal Gear 2 are probably good examples of games that didn't need to change, but did, and they didn't work out very well. And I felt that honestly, even though I know you love that game, when Super Mario World was very different with Yoshi's Island, I was like,
I think that's even kind of different though. That was so much more a name thing than it was an actual
Sure.
sequel.
Sure. But I was so happy to hear Dragon Quest XI was a single-player, expansive role-playing game because for some reason Square Enix decided to make Dragon Quest X an MMO, and I this has always bothered me, and I understand that Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV are very popular and very good games, and people enjoy them, but they're MMOs. They're not really Final Fantasy games, and I was always confused why you would take a series that is established for something or a series of things, Final Fantasy, maybe it's narrative or it's characters or it's gameplay, and then just totally change it, but call it a core Final Fantasy game. In other words, why wasn't Final Fantasy XI Final Fantasy Online?
And that's the thing. That is the bigger question, I think, is that why didn't they just go with Final Fantasy Online? Why'd they have to call it 11? Why'd they have to call it 14? And that's the thing. When you get to 11 and 14, it's a little ridiculous.
I think if you look at
stuff.
sales, and Colin will back me up here, time over time, every Final Fantasy is bigger than the last.
That's not true, Greg.
I know.
There's reasons for it. There's certainly marketing reasons for it. And there's also them saying, well, with Final Fantasy specifically, and I think some of our viewers might feel this way, is that, well, Final Fantasy 1 was very class-based, didn't really have much of a story. Final Fantasy 5 was very class-based. It's a game that's very different, while Final Fantasy 4 had established classes and established characters that grew in certain ways. So the games are already different from each other. While you have active battle and one thing, you have materia and Esper systems, you have all these kinds of things. And so they're like, well, what's the difference? You know, when you get we're going to make it an MMO and change the mechanics, just like we've changed the mechanics in the other games. But I think that there's a situation where it goes a little too far and confuses the audience, and also frustrates me as someone who wanted Final Fantasy XI to be a core Final Fantasy game, especially after the way I felt about Final Fantasy X, which was not positive. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's cool that they were always going to make Dragon Quest XI, I think, a single player game regardless. But it was so weird to me that Dragon Quest, which is so sacred to a lot of people as being this very grindy, very traditional Japanese role playing game, suddenly make it an MMO.
Yeah.
As opposed to just calling it Dragon Quest Online, just like they would Dragon Quest Heroes, which is a Musou from Omega Force. It's like they didn't call that Dragon Quest 11, so why would you call this other thing Dragon Quest 11? So I just wanted to discuss if there are any other series that you guys feel like changed radically or were known for something and then changed and tried to do something else, because I don't always think it works out like it did during the NES era.
Yeah. I mean, I think that more often than not it doesn't, especially nowadays. But Final Fantasy, I think, is the key one. But because when you look at 12 kind of played a little bit more like an MMO, but it wasn't an MMO. It still was a Final Fantasy core game, and it felt right. So even though the class systems are different and the battle systems different or whatever, I feel you in that it's still the same thing. It's once you go into the MMO territory, it is a different genre. It is a completely different style of game. Whether the gameplay is different or not, that doesn't matter. It's more about the style of the game itself, you know? I can't really think of too many other franchises that did this.
That's my question. So are you talking about gameplay shifts, or it has to be completely from the ground up? Like, does Jak and Daxter's move from Jak 2 to 3 and from 1 to 3?
Yeah. I think that's the thing. It's not so much just the gameplay. Just every game's different. It's more about changing what the game is.
Sure.
You know, because
at its core, Jak and Daxter, you pick up, it's a platformer. I'm here to play a platformer.
Yep.
Jak 2 is
a little
now
bit
you
more
have
of an
all these guns and open world, this GTA in this Jak universe. Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, and that worked out for it.
Sure.
I think in a lot of ways.
I enjoyed that. I think when you start talking about these, and even with the Final Fantasy example, you're talking about things that are a hit at one point, but what's going on in that genre anymore? What's the next step? Where is the future going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Naughty Dog puts out Jak and Daxter, Precursor's Legacy. It's fun. I rented it during my unlimited Blockbuster summer rental when that was a thing or whatever and played it. I was like, oh, that's good. But it was like just as like that 3D platformer thing was starting to burn out, right? So they make that jump to go like to salvage it, right? Because you can't have the exact same thing. Now another example of that putting a change out that way, I think maybe to its detriment, is Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia Sands of Time, amazing game. Just give me that again. And instead they start going down this whole path that leads to Warrior Within and all this other stuff. And it's like, eh.
Well, I mean, see, that was one of the first franchises that came to mind when you were talking about this. But I don't think that they necessarily...
That doesn't count?
I don't know if it does, because what changed in that game? The
emo rock music.
They added emo rock music and they made it a little bit darker and more. Was Sands of Time rated M? I don't think it was.
I can't imagine it was.
So I guess that is a
pretty
significant shift then, going from being open to pretty much anyone to play to just people above 17. But the gameplay was still the same, and the game was still the same with Warrior Within and Twin Thrones or whatever the hell the last one was called. But because I still loved those games all the way through. Sands of Time is definitely my favorite, but I don't think that the game shifted enough for it to be radically different. Whereas
Teen.
Jack 2,
Rated T for teen.
Yeah, I'm almost positive Warrior Within was rated M because I remember I couldn't buy it when it first came out, and Kevin's sister had to buy it for me.
Did she make funny
Thank
eyes
you,
the whole
Kevin's
time?
Sister.
Was she like chewing gum? Was she like an 80s? Did she have big 80s hair? Was
Yeah,
she in
she
like
did.
pink?
It was weird.
I'm assuming this happened in the 80s, right?
Yeah, she was dressed like Jubilee. It was weird, but
That was
yeah.
90s.
Well, I think there's a. I'm thinking about it, and I think there's a more concise way we can put this because the question is still undefined, and I think the answers are undefined too, and that's fine. Where it's because you brought up Grand Theft Auto, and Grand Theft Auto is a great example of a series that changed, right? And it changed for the better, right? It doesn't always have to change for the worse. I guess the question is, should consumers and fans expect something similar to what they've already experienced within the IP, the established IP? And does it show that, obviously there's a marketing and financial reason, economic reason for publishers and developers to want to develop new kinds of games under established franchises. But does it also, is some of the blame on the consumer as well for being usually wary of something that they don't know about? So in other words, like Grand Theft Auto changed, Red Dead changed, we talk about Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and these other games that have changed. I also think Fallout's a great example of that. Fallout, most people, a vast majority of people that have played Fallout have only played Fallout 3 and New Vegas. The other Fallout games are radically different. They're role-playing games, but they're not Fallout 3. But then I see something like Wolfenstein, which is, also a Bethesda property now. And I'm like, this is always been just kind of there's spin-offs, I guess, but it's always been kind of true to what it was. Wolfenstein is a World War II based alternate history shooter, right? And that's always been what it is. And so we know when we get a Wolfenstein game, that's what we should and could expect. And it goes back to, what Mercury Steam did to Castlevania, which at first seemed really good and then ended up being really bad at the end, where they took something that was established and tried to do something different, and it worked out, but then they made it too different, and it didn't work out. So I guess what I'm saying is, should we have an expectation of some sort of continuity, whether it's in gameplay or whether it's in style or theme or setting? Because, for instance, Final Fantasy Tactics is a radically different Final Fantasy game. It's one of the great Final Fantasy games, but it came out between 7 and 8. Why didn't they just call that Final Fantasy 8?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it really is the same thing as an MMO being Final Fantasy 11. So I was always kind of confused by that.
No, you're definitely identifying the problems. It's this constantly swirling thing. Whereas if they kept making Prince of Persia the way I wanted Prince of Persia with no emo music or whatever, I'm just using this example, right? Sure, you're running this into the ground. Stop doing that. Eventually the tides turn, right? If they want to go make a new IP, nobody gets on board and buys it. So if they put a new Prince of Persia IP on it, suddenly I'm like, well, this isn't the Prince of Persia game I want to play. I think a really good example of this is Ratchet and Clank, right? Ratchet and Clank is Ratchet and Clank, and it's Ratchet and Clank, and everybody's like, nobody hates. Stop making the same old
done.
Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, here's All for One. Here's this tower defense. And we're like, no, that is not Ratchet and Clank. What are you doing? And they're like, well, we wanted to make something different because you said you wanted something different, but this is too different. So would you rather us go off and make Fuse? And then nobody cares about, you know what I mean? Like nobody's happy. We're all Goldilocks.
I think Kingdom Hearts is another perfect example of that, where everyone's like, oh, like not everyone. I say everyone, but I mean me. And there's a bunch of other people out there that are like, I want
Every Tim.
the numbered sequel because I know what that means. That
Sure.
means it's going to be mainline. That means it's going to have a certain level of production value and influence on the story, and the gameplay is going to be up to here, and all these different things. Now, people have been getting at me a lot recently about
Sons of bitches.
my Kingdom Hearts comments, and because they say that whenever I talk about the spin-offs, I kind of write them off, and I'm like, I don't want this shit, and they're not good. I'm not saying they're not good at all. I'm saying I haven't played them, and I do know that people that have played them, they range from loving them to some of them not being that good. There's a wide gamut of all that stuff. But also I understand that there's the story does matter in some of them, like specifically Dream Drop Distance and Birth by Sleep. But those are perfect examples of kind of what we're talking about, where because they're not mainline numbered sequels, there is this perception that they're not as valued and that they're not as big of a deal. Whereas like with Final Fantasy, adding that number means it's a big deal. It means that it's going to be, there's a promise there. And so being an MMO, you're going off that promise. Like you're messing with things, and that's when the hardcore people like lash out, and then it just turns into you splinter the stuff. Whereas Final Fantasy Tactics, no one splintered. The people that like it, they like it. And they can like Final Fantasy, the numbered ones as well, and there's not really an issue. Whereas the moment that you start doing this, there's this weird divide between the purists, not purists, and all this stuff.
Right. And it's not even, to me, it's not so much a judgment call, because if they called Final Fantasy 16, or if they made Final Fantasy Tactics 2 like a real one, not the GBA and DS ones, which are fine, and I enjoyed those. But if they
Which are fine, but less than.
no, I mean they're not as good as the original Final Fantasy Tactics by any stretch of the imagination. But if they made Final Fantasy Tactics 2 a real one, but they were like, it's Final Fantasy 16, I'd be like, whatever. Like just give me the fucking game already. So I think that we like that's what I was saying, that there's a loose or maybe even undefined definition of what we're talking about. Yet I feel like there's blame to be laid on all sides, and because of the, like Greg was saying, the roving expectations. Because we as gamers, like Castlevania is a great example. Like I had expectations of continuing to get the Igavania Castlevania game, and I got it over and over and over again. I was like, it's awesome. Like when people are like, what's your favorite one? I'm like, I'm not even sure. Like they're all awesome, right? Because I was looking for that formula. But then when they take Ego off of Castlevania and give it to Mercury Steam, the game comes very different. And so what does that mean to a Castlevania fan? What does Castlevania mean at that point? And I think that's what the real question is. Like, should we have an expectation that Castlevania means Gothic?
Yeah.
Belmont's fighting fucking Dracula and all these kinds of things, because we did not get that with Mercury Steam. We got a modern game, really, with them. Not to spoil it because it doesn't seem modern at the beginning, but you had your chance.
God.
And so... But at the same time, it's a conundrum between the publishers and the developers, because we always want new ideas. At least I do. I always want new ideas, new games, new IP. But publishers won't sign off on them, so they pigeonhole the new idea into something that already exists to get your attention.
Yeah.
And that to me is somewhat of a destructive idea, but it's also the climate of buying and making games, unfortunately, because Vanquish, for instance, Platinum's Vanquish, which is a fucking awesome game. If that was, I mean, not that Platinum had any established franchise really at the time. If that was Call of Duty Future Warfare or whatever.
Right.
That would have been fucking huge. You know what I mean? But because it was Vanquish, no one played it. They're like, what the hell is Vanquish?
Well, I mean,
I'm not
keeping
gonna
with
take
this
a 6-hour
conversation
on this.
here, like going back to like Mario 2, Doki Doki Panic, originally in Japan, if that was in America, would that have been a hit? But now that we know it is Mario 2, huge mega blockbuster,
Sure.
I mean, it's a little different back then with how things.
It's like how
Well, they
were,
also thought we just weren't capable of playing that game.
the other one, yeah. But I mean, still, like that was taking this random franchise that America had no,
Sure.
nothing for, and then now it's Mario.
It's smart. The economic imperative is on them to do these things, and it's smart. I'd be interested to see what the audience thinks of this particular question, if there should be expectations. Like when Dragon Quest X was announced and it was an MMO, I was aghast. I was like, I can't believe... I understand. You did it with Final Fantasy. All right, like I don't really feel like Final Fantasy, frankly, is as sacred as Dragon Quest in terms of like what it is. There would be no Final Fantasy without Dragon Quest, and they've always been the same. You know what I mean? It's just very grindy, very hardcore, very long, very fucking super deep, super meaty games. But they're all single player, and they're unabashedly single player games. And then you suddenly just take a left turn, and then you're surprised when no one really cares about the game. I mean, the thing I was thinking about, a good example of this. I think doing it right, even though we've talked, a great deal about Sega's, what they don't do right. The one thing they did do right, well, they did a lot of things right, but the one thing that I'm identifying here that they did right was with Phantasy Star, because Phantasy Star, the 4 Phantasy Star games are sci-fi based Japanese role-playing games, and they're really good games. People really, really love those games, and they've not gone back for 20 years to make a new Phantasy Star game in the core series, which fucking is shocking to me that they haven't made Phantasy Star 5 yet. But when they made an MMO out of it, they called it Phantasy Star Online. And Phantasy Star Online was fucking huge. And they didn't burn any bridges by saying, like, this is Phantasy Star 5 and disappointing people. It was its own thing in that same universe. So I often think back about that game and the popularity of that game on PC and on Dreamcast and its sequel, which is also very popular, although I don't think we even got it here.
Here's a question for you.
Yeah.
The online business, because you're saying, why didn't they call it Final Fantasy Online? Da-da-da. Is that just a term now so anchored in the past? Like for Phantasy Star Online, it's coming out when America Online is still a thing. When it's still a fucking feature that this thing connects to the internet and does all of this. Like you expect any game now to come out and connect to the internet and do something. So like, is that you think there's some lineage to that word that they're dropping it from, and they're saying no, it's a Final Fantasy numbered game because Final Fantasy Online would say that this isn't online when in reality there's leaderboards or whatever connections for
Sure. No, it's an interesting question. I think with Phantasy Star Online having come out when it did, which is a turn of the century kind of game, that made sense. And I think, but here's the thing is that if the precedent was set by Square Enix to name Final Fantasy 11 Final Fantasy Online when it came out 12 years ago, or whatever it was, then Final Fantasy 14 would have been Final Fantasy Online 2 or some other name.
Sure.
And with the Final Fantasy game we've been waiting for forever would be Final Fantasy 13. And that's I don't know. It's just interesting to think about it. I don't really have an answer or a direction to go in this conversation.
Weren't the games actually titled Final Fantasy 11 Online?
It was called Final Fantasy 11, Online, I think,
Yeah, so I mean,
but
it still did the online.
But that was old as hell too, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, even 14 isn't Isn't it Final Fantasy 14 online? Maybe not.
No, I think
A
it's just
Realm
Final Fantasy.
Reborn
Yep,
is the
that's
one.
Well, that was the
remake. of it.
remake of 14. God, who knows?
It's
Also,
just-
Phantasy Star Online 2. I remember a lot of people. I keep seeing tweets about it. I think it did recently come out in America.
Oh, okay, cool. Because it was on Vita. And they announced it, I think, because Phantasy Star Online 2 and Phantasy Star Nova were announced in Japan on Vita, but never came here. And people were upset about it because I think the game's in English. Like, I think the game's localized for
interesting.
Southeast Asian countries that, that happens every once in a while. That happened with PlayStation All-Stars when the beta was up, and it was in, like, Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm more curious to see what you guys think and what our audience thinks about that, because I just feel like we've lost sight of the expectations. And one of the things that I was surprised you didn't bring up is Tony Hawk.
Oh my God! Yeah, no, you're right. That's it.
Where it started at crap and then got really good with Thug.
Yeah, exactly.
God, I hate you if that was backwards. I mean, again, I don't want to hate on Thug because I love Thug, and
was
even
awesome.
Thug 2 has a lot of things that I really care about there. But the moment that you can get off your board, that was the moment when it was like, all right, they've ran out of core gameplay ideas to add that make this more fluid and more fun and better. And Thug was when it got all storied. Thug was a product of the time in the sense of they just were trying to match the Grand Theft Auto feel and all of these different things. And that's when it just turned away from the arcadey skateboarding game into this more open world thing. And then American Wasteland comes out and it's like, it's all one world and there's no loading. And it's like, well, man, driving or like skating through this tunnel that's freaking 3 minutes long to get to the next section. It's not loading, but it ain't fun, And it's like all those things. And like, damn, Tony Hawk's a good example of that.
I mean, that was one of the ones I thought of. I mean, because I've thought of series that have been really consistent too. And if they weren't consistent, they made it clear that this was a spinoff. I think Halo is a good example of that. I think Uncharted is a good example of that. Gears is a good example of that. Call of Duty is a good example of that. So there, I feel like there's exceptions in all of those where there's like Halo Wars, whatever. What was that? What was not Halo Wars? What was that?
No, I know you're talking about the one
the
that
strategy game.
Yeah, Clayman
Halo
and
Wars.
Clements got all. It was Halo Wars.
Halo Wars, yeah.
So, but it wasn't like that. Wasn't Halo 4. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah,
it was
yeah.
like.
Well, there's also Reach and ODST.
Right.
And all those other
It
ones.
seems
too.
like it's somewhat sacred to them, the continuity.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
like what people
they know what's up. They
Yeah.
understand like what people are looking for, and they know that if they name it something different, like that's a different game. It's not going to have Chief, or it's not going to have this, or whatever.
exactly.
I mean, coming back to it, right? And a modern example is Metal Gear and their numbered series, right? Like Peace Walker is a portable experience. Portable Ops is something different. Revengeance is something different. Now, arguably, obviously, Metal Gear has changed, evolved over time.
Yeah.
Like but it's not. You're not making the jump from Metal Gear Solid to Metal Gear Solid 4. You know what I mean? Like there's incremental changes to get you there.
And I would go even further than that though with Metal Gear 2. Metal Gear 2, not
You're-
Metal Gear Solid
not Metal
2,
Gear Solid 2.
is not really a Metal Gear game, but the original Metal Gear is a perfect evolution
And you're
from
talking-
to Metal Gear like MSX,
making
NES
sure,
Metal
yeah,
Gear. Into Metal Gear Solid makes perfect sense.
Right,
to me.
right.
You know, like that's
I mean,
just
that's
an evolution
Mario
of the
to
tech.
Mario 64.
Exactly, the tech makes sense there at that point, right? But I don't know. Maybe a lot of people disagree with me. I think we just have to be bolder by supporting new ideas, so that maybe publishers and developers don't feel like they need to pigeonhole things into things that already exist, but to give us new things that we love. But
well, that's
the
why
sales,
you see the indies doing this, right? Where they get to come out with a crazy idea, crazy name, whatever, and make their stance and their thing. And then meanwhile, it is all sequels from AAA people.
yeah, well,
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, last thing I want to talk about is Pokemon, where I feel like they do a good job of the spin-off thing, where if it's the mystery dungeon and all that stuff, those are not mainline Pokemon games. If there's a color after the title, that's essentially their number system. And we're not going to see a Pokemon MMO called Pokemon Rainbow or whatever the hell.
Maybe we will.
I'd be totally in for
we
that.
should see a Pokemon.
We
MMO,
should see an
though.
MMO. That
makes too much sense.
If NX comes out and they're just like, if DMX walks out, he's like, Pokemon MMO. Dog. They won.
Yeah, that's
They'd
it.
fucking win, Greg.